So it's important to understand what makes a good building bale, or rather we call it a construction grade bale. What are the qualities that we need in our bales of straw that mean that it's going to make a good building, a high quality building? Because bales are made for different reasons, and some bales are made just for horse bedding, and often those bales are very light and loose so that one person can easily move them about. What we need are bales with different qualities so that we can use them for construction, and so that once we put weight on them or compress them, they're not going to move at all after that. So the very first quality that we're looking for is dryness. We want a dry bale, and that means a moisture content of less than 20%. And you would use your sensors to know if a bale was dry. First of all, you would look at the bale, look at its colour. You can see that this bale is quite a yellowy bright colour, and that's already a good sign that it's not wet. I would be looking for any grey patches or black patches, just maybe part way on the bale, or maybe one whole side of the bale had gone grey. And that would be an indication, that discoloration is an indication that the bale itself has got wet at some point. It may now be dry, so it might not be a problem, but it's very difficult to tell when you've got an area of bale on the top whether the straw is actually wet halfway through the bale. And generally gravity would take water all the way through the bale, and you would expect to see, if you had a grey mark here, you would expect to see it on the other side as well, where the rain had gone all the way through the bale. That sort of patch is generally from a drip in the roof during storage. If you've got the whole of one side of the bale is grey, but when you look at it, it hardly penetrates anywhere into the bale, that would tell you that the bale had been stacked on the outside of the barn, and it had got wet and dry and wet and dry when it had rained. That's not really a problem, and it wouldn't be a reason for discarding the bale unless you had other signs of it being wet. So we're using our sensors to think about to look at whether the bale is wet or not. We've used our eyes to see, and the other thing we might see is green shoots popping up, or even mushrooms. Now, both of those are an indication that there's sufficient moisture to allow spores in the bale to grow, and that would be a reason for discarding those bales. The other thing you're doing is you're using your sense of smell. If you walk into a barn and it smells mouldy, the best thing to do is walk out again and go somewhere else, because mould for most people is a very noticeable smell, and you don't want to have any bales that have mould in them, because that then could affect the rest of the bales as you're building, and it is an indication that the bales have been wet. It's usual for the farmer to store the bales in the barn and to have good ventilation through them by the way they're stored, because they're not really worth anything if they've got too much moisture in. So most farmers are going to take care of that. And if you're really concerned about the moisture, you can take a moisture meter with a long prong, and you can test some of the bales to see what their moisture content is. So being dry is the most important aspect of the bale. The second most important aspect is the density of the bale, which is related to how heavy it is. So one of the ways you can tell is to pick the bale up and see how heavy that feels. I've got two bales here, and this one is heavier than that one, but they're about the same size. They're from two different farmers, and so the heavier one is more dense because it's heavier for the same size. Density is measured in kilograms per cubic metre, So we can work out the density once we know the length, the width and the depth and the weight. Another way of looking at the density is about how tight the strings are, because that also is an indication of how much straw has been tightly packed into the bale using the strings, because the baling machine is a very simple machine and really you can just affect the length and the tension on the strings. So in this one again you can see the strings are pretty tight, but I can pull them reasonably easily off the bale, and as I do that, if I pull it hard, you can actually see the length of the bale shrinking a bit as I pull it up and let it go, which is an indication that it could have had a little bit more straw packed into it with the strings at that tension. Whereas with this bale, it's actually quite hard to get my fingers under the string, and then I can't pull it in the same way as I could on that one. So you can see this one has more pull on it than that one, which is another indication that this bale is more dense. And so tight strings and a heavy weight are indications of density. And we're looking for bales that are between about 80 and 120 kilograms per cubic metre. So it's quite a wide range. But in the construction they will become more dense because we put them under compression, and we'll end up with a density of around 120 kilograms per cubic metre after the building has been constructed and compressed. So we've been talking about density and how weight and string tightness can help. One of the things you've got to be aware of is that one other thing can alter the weight of a bale, and that's if it's very wet. So a wet bale is really heavy, so you just need to be aware that you're not being tempted to buy wet bales rather than dense bales. Now, another feature that we're looking for in a good construction bale is the length of straw, because in modern harvesting techniques we can get harvesters that chop the straw up so that it can get ploughed back in, and others that don't chop it up. So if you look at the straw from this bale, you can see that it has actually been chopped up. It's really quite short, and that has still given us a dense dry bale, but if we're going to customise it, if we're going to make it into half bales or change the shape or put notches in it, this would actually make it much more difficult to use. Whereas this straw in this bale, you can see it's much longer. See, it's hard for me to pull it out of the bale, and I've pulled it out and broken it, but you can see it's still got some very nice long straw in it. So that's what we're looking for, is bales that have got long straw in them, not short straw. Okay, so that's the difference between the short chopped up straw and the long straw, and you'll find that these are a little bit more difficult to customise, but they're much better to work with if you're changing the shape or notching them. Still thinking about a construction grade bale, the other thing that we're looking for is a uniform shape and size. So we want a bale that's a regular shape, it's nice and square on the ends, and it's not all lumpy or bent or curved in any way. And these bales that I've got here are good examples of that. But you can get bales where the baling machine, one string is slightly tighter than the other, and that has the effect of making the bales curved when they come out of the box. And that's a very common problem with older baling machines and with one-off farmers, that their machine, they maybe tighten it up exactly when they first start harvesting the field, but as they get part way through, one string slackens off a bit because of the age of the machine, and you end up with banana-shaped bales, and they really are very, very difficult to work with, and it's better not to use those. So we're looking for a regular uniform shape, and like we talked about before, ideally you want the top of the bale to be as square and flat as possible. There is a payoff between density and uniformity of the ends, because the more you tighten the strings, the more likely you are to get that curviness going on between the straw in the middle and the straw on either side of the strings. So you're looking for an optimum between strings really tight, a good density, and nice flat ends, so that you don't have to do too much work to the end of that bale. And I think if you follow those prescriptions, a dry bale, a dense bale, a bale with long straw in it, and a bale that's of uniform size, then you will have a good construction grade bale.